When we look at the modern Middle East, the contrast is jarring. On one side, endless proxy wars and nuclear standoffs. On the other, the ultra-wealthy skylines of the Gulf states. The easiest assumption to make is that the region is simply inherently chaotic. Curious, shifting tone, but to understand what's actually happening, we have to look past the daily headlines and examine the underlying architecture. The Middle East isn't broken. It is functioning exactly the way it was engineered to operate a little over a century ago. To read this blueprint, we have to trace the system back to its origin point, not in the deserts of the Gulf, but in a single room in London in 1912. The seemingly random instability we see today is the deliberate output of a Western strategic system, a system designed from the ground up to prioritize one specific goal above all else: the uninterrupted flow of energy. In 1912, Winston Churchill made a highly controversial decision. As First Lord of the Admiralty, he chose to transition the British Royal Navy's fuel source away from domestic coal and toward foreign petroleum. The military calculation was straightforward. Oil-fired boilers were more efficient. They gave ships higher top speeds, longer operational range, and they produced less visible smoke on the horizon. Churchill traded fuel security for tactical superiority, but that decision carried an immediate hidden cost. Great Britain had vast reserves of coal, but almost no domestic oil. Overnight, the British Empire made itself entirely dependent on a vital energy resource that it simply did not geographically control. To mitigate this strategic vulnerability, the British government took action in 1914. They purchased a 51% controlling stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, the corporation we now know as BP. Churchill's naval policy took a region that was previously peripheral to imperial thinking and made it indispensable. Access to Middle Eastern oil became a matter of absolute existential survival for Western superpowers. Just as oil was becoming the lifeblood of global military power, the First World War ended. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire shattered the existing political order, leaving a massive power vacuum across the region. This historical map illustrates the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This was a secret 1916 treaty where Britain and France agreed to divide the remaining Ottoman territories into their own spheres of influence. They drew borders based on strategic imperial convenience, rather than local identities or history. Notice how the province of Mosul was specifically folded into the newly created state of Iraq under British administration. This was not an accident. Geologists believed Mosul held vast oil reserves. As a result, Kurds, Sunni Arabs, and Shia Arabs were bound together inside borders drawn explicitly to secure that energy supply. We see a parallel strategic move in this typed document, the Balfour Declaration. By expressing support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, Britain was also securing a friendly, allied foothold. This specific placement provided vital proximity to the Suez Canal and helped link Britain's expanding, oil-rich territories between Egypt and Iraq. The physical geography of the entire region shifted in purpose. Territory was no longer defined by the people living on it. It was now defined by its utility as a potential energy supply and a transit route. This creates an obvious tension. What happens when the populations trapped inside this engineered blueprint try to resist it? In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh attempted to strike at the core of British power. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, meaning he transferred the control of the oil assets from foreign private ownership directly to the Iranian state. The Western response was decisive. Losing control of this oil was deemed an unacceptable threat to national security. In 1953, the United Kingdom and the US CIA orchestrated a joint coup. They overthrew the democratically elected Mossadegh and restored the Shah to power, strictly to reclaim control over the oil. That intervention became the original sin of modern diplomacy. The resentment it generated festered beneath the surface for decades, eventually boiling over during the 1979 Iranian Revolution. The revolution rejected the entire structure of Western external control and permanently fractured relations with the West. The 1953 coup laid bare the ultimate rule of the system. Western superpowers will actively suppress democratic self-determination if that democracy threatens their control over global oil. After the Second World War, As the British Empire fell into decline, the United States inherited the blueprint. America assumed the structural responsibility of securing the Middle East's energy flows. This responsibility was eventually formalized by the Carter Doctrine in 1980. This policy explicitly declared that the Persian Gulf was of vital strategic interest to the United States, and that any threat to the region's oil flow would be met with military force. Under this doctrine, the blueprint manifests in 3 distinct variations today. The first is direct intervention and instability. When states with heavy oil reserves possess weak or resistant regimes, like Iraq and Libya, they are often broken or destabilized when control slips. This map shows the second variation, controlled stability. This is a strict protection for oil pact. In places like Saudi Arabia and the smaller Gulf states, authoritarian monarchies receive heavy militarization and external Western protection. Their internal politics are overlooked as long as the energy reliably flows outward. The third variation focuses on strategic corridors. Regions like Israel and Syria might have smaller oil reserves, but they are heavily supported or fiercely contested purely because of their geographic proximity to shipping lanes, pipelines, and Western security orbits. Whether a Middle Eastern nation is violently chaotic or enjoying ultra-wealthy stability, the outcome isn't random. Both extremes are predictable, designed products of the exact same geopolitical equation. Modern superpowers sustain this system through the weaponization of language, framing interventions as promoting democracy or fighting insurgents to justify the use of force. The concept of freedom is invoked selectively. It is a highly useful narrative when it weakens an unfriendly state, but it is quietly ignored when an allied autocracy delivers the required stability, military access, and oil. Yet, the genuine political aspiration of ordinary people in the region is simple. They want freedom from both domestic autocracy and foreign interference. Those democratic desires constantly collide with the mechanized reality of the system. The permanent Western military footprint patrolling the Gulf is a constant reminder that logistics and energy flows matter more than human rights. The enduring tragedy of this century-old blueprint is that the people of the Middle East are rarely treated as ends in themselves. They are forced to navigate an external geopolitical order that repeatedly sacrifices their freedom just to keep the global engine running.